there's a Hispanic man, entirely innocent, and yet accused, and in the process of being accused by District Attorney Neil Pinkston. His name is Rudy Soto Rodriguez. And I met him yesterday on his front porch after church. I took my mother, 94, and a son to on a quick jaunt to visit this family living at 7602 Lee Crest Lane in Hixson. And first we couldn't find the address, but there it was on the box. And I went through a gate across a lawn strewn with various objects and went to the front door of a very, very modest house. And at the door was Mr. Soto Rodriguez, first name Rudy. He is a man who works in the building trades. He's on a project downtown in one of the apartment complexes. And he is an innocent man accused. He is accused of violating Title 55, the Transportation Code. And it is said that he, in the report about his arrest at Chattanooga.com, it is said that he was driving without a license. And in fact, that is one of the charges. And he was good enough to show me the paper that he had been given. And I will have to go back and check with him to get a copy of that, because if he was charged, as I indicated to him, if he was charged with failure to exhibit, well, that can't apply to him because he does not have a license and he is not a licensee. And so that statute, which is clearly written to apply to licensees, can't be made to apply to him. Because the statute is has very wooden language, and it says something like, upon demand of an officer, the licensee shall show such licensee's license to the officer on demand. That's what it is. It's very repetitive, not very imaginative, and very colorless, bland, bureaucratic sounding phrase. There's not a lot of ways to get a hold of a traveler, as Mr. Rudy Soto Rodriguez is, without abusing the way the law is written here in Tennessee. The law in Tennessee is written to apply to everybody involved in transportation, who has to have a license to be involved in a profitable and profit-seeking activity. But the law does not have in view of its scope, it does not have in its liabilities section any claim upon a private user. That would be a private individual who is using the roadways for his own private pleasure, his own private necessities, and his own purposes that are outside the claims of the state, right? There's private use. And if you read the most cited decision of all time, the most cited Supreme Court decision of all time, Hale versus Hinkle, the private person who is minding his own business and committing no torts has no duty or obligation at all to the state. He just simply doesn't for anything that is private. And we've had an expansion of the right of privacy through even the abortion decision and many others. Here we now have gay people having a right to have their private sexual relationships made public by recognition of marriage. So even there, you have an expansion of the recognition of rights. And yet here, in perhaps the most fundamental of all rights, the right of movement, the right of travel from his house in Hixson to his work site downtown, Mr. Rodriguez, who has been in the country for 13 years with his wife, Daisy. Well, I don't know that she's been here with him that long, but he is married. His wife's name is Daisy, and the couple have two young children whom I met briefly when I was dropping off making a visit Sunday afternoon before lunch and after church. I intended it to be just a 10-minute visit, and that's all it really was. And I said, well, Mr. Rudy, would you mind if I step in for a second? It was a little cool on that porch. And so we stood in his living room. There was a TV playing in the background, an LED TV on the wall, and his wife's standing there listening. The son's looking up at the stranger with the bow tie and talking with Dad. And the stranger telling his dad, "You, sir, are an innocent man. You have done nothing wrong. You are not a criminal." That's what these young sons of an immigrant heard the Caucasian stranger say to their dad, and pointing to him, "You, sir, are an innocent man. You, sir, are not a criminal, and you have done nothing wrong. And the state is abusing the law to arrest you and harass you and drag you before the court. Now, I bring this up about Rudy Soto Rodriguez because he's an innocent man, and everyone should know it. He's an innocent man who's done nothing wrong, charged in driving without a driver's license and speeding. Now, what's interesting about him is that we have been blessed in the past week with a very long ruling out of U.S. District Court in Nashville by Judge Alita, I think that's her name, Alita Trauger. And the case is between the state of Tennessee and two innocent men who were poor. And they had their driver's license privileges, as we say, revoked for non-payment of court fees. It's a story about how the state uses the driver's license apparatus punitively and wickedly and punitively. And as Judge Trauger is pointing out, in denying the state's motion to dismiss, the state's notion to grant a summary judgment on the law in its behalf, and the state's petition to have a class action claim for the filing by these two representative men called a class action. It is a class action suit, and Judge Trauger in U.S. District Court in Nashville is allowing the case to proceed. And it is a remarkable development in this whole issue about the right of travel. Now, I'll say right up front that Judge Trauger is confused because, in a way, her ruling is marketing for the entire position of state government that there is no right to travel, except, as she points out, except in the interstate movement of one party to another state in changing of domicile. The state of Tennessee, in its high court rulings and its denials of petition for writ of certiorari, and in the high court rulings and the appellate court rulings, all agree, let's say they have come to agree, as they chip away at your rights. They're chipping away deliberately with each case at your free right of movement, your right to freely move yourself, your personal effects, and your people from one place to another without permission, right? That's what a right is. If you have to ask permission to do something, you don't have a right. You simply don't. And Judge Trauger repeats the mantra as if somehow it solves the problem that there is no right to drive. There is no right to drive a motor vehicle, or there is no right to operate a motor vehicle on the public way. And that's true. There's not, because the word operate a motor vehicle is a regulable activity. And indeed, she's right. In her ruling, which runs past 70 pages, she cites this nostrum that there is no right to drive a motor vehicle. And that's true. No one disputes that. But the question is there a right to travel? And so while Judge Trauger in her discussion grants the nostrum that there is no right to operate a motor vehicle, in looking at the abuse of the courts on more than 140,000 Tennesseans, more than 100, get that, and 40,000 Tennesseans have, and thousands in Chattanooga, thousands in Hamilton County, right here, right? People, they have had their right to drive, if you will, their privileges revoked by Commissioner David Perkey's Department of Safety and Homeland Security. He has done that to more than 140,000, and he has restored that right to fewer than, I think it's about 10%. Very few have had their fewer than 11,000 have had restored. In other words, the judge says well over 92% of the people whose driver's licenses were revoked turned out not, in fact, to be people who could be coerced into payment, because the whole system of revoking driver's licenses is to get poor people to pay their court fees, fines, and taxes. Now, some people have means to pay and they won't, and so you could say that they're willfully not paying. But thousands and thousands across the state, and many thousands here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, can't pay because they're poor. They are too poor to pay their fees and their fines and their obligations. She says, can it really be said then that Section 4024, I think it's 105, is a collection mechanism that, though it's over breath, sweeps up indigent people? I've maybe not quoted her quite correctly here in my notes. The number would suggest that to the contrary, taking away the driver's license of indigent people is the core of what the state does. And so she's saying, is there a rational connection? Is there a compelling connection between the state's interest in collecting its fees in court and revoking the right of travel? Because that's what happens if you're let's say for a moment you are a driver. Okay, you're a driver, though you're not actually involved in commerce, but you're a driver sort of by mistake, and you think that you can't use your car without being a driver, and you can't use your car or truck apart from your driver's license. If that license is revoked, you effectively are given a civil death sentence. It is a civil death sentence that Governor Haslam and that also Mayor Andy Burke and also Sheriff Jim Hammond imposed upon the poor, a civil death sentence to accuse them of traveling in their cars without a license or on a revoked, suspended, expired licenses, which many people have. Many people are out of order with their paperwork. And this is David Toulis, and we're here at 92.7 FM and 95.3 HD4. That's high definition digital radio, 800-8949. That is the number, 800-8949. And now to show this this long ruling in its best light, I think we need to consider Rudy Soto Rodriguez, an innocent man, a working man here in Chattanooga, who works right now downtown. He's been in the country for 13 years, married with his wife, Daisy. I met her yesterday as well, dropping by on a courtesy call after worshiping God in his house. He is facing a May 1:30 p.m. city court date. And I asked him about his defense. He said he was going to have to hire a lawyer. Here's a working man who's going to have to engage a lawyer who wants $2,000 up front, right? $2,000 for what? Well, for being accused erroneously under a statute that the city has been told it cannot be enforced against private users, and which Sheriff Jim Hammond on the 1st of March has been told by me, David Toulis, your host, that he cannot enforce that statute either against private users. And I didn't tell him in so many words. I just laid out the law to him, and that was done by a grace that I would say I, your host here, David Toulis, have extended to Jim Hammond, who is a candidate for re-election. And the grace is a simple review of all the relevant statutes. And that's what I did. It's called Transportation Administrative Notice. And I put Sheriff Hammond on notice about the law. That's all I did. I didn't make any arguments in that document. Though you think over 20 pages, I would have had occasion to make an argument. But I didn't make an argument. I did not. I simply laid it all out and explained in very, very brief way what it means, okay? And what we have in Tennessee law is a liberality and a looseness which a certain category of people pretends does not exist. And that liberality and looseness in the Tennessee Code that is to your benefit, the benefit of you, my listener, is this: that the state has authority to enforce the Transportation Code, which is Title 55, against people who are involved in transportation, but not people who are not. People such as Rudy Soto Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez is not involved in transportation. He is not buying or carrying goods or people for hire. Even if he takes his pickup truck with lumber in the back and tools, he's not involved in transportation. He's using his truck privately to get from his house on Lee Crest Lane in Hickson, 7602 Lee Crest Lane in Hickson, to his job site downtown. As the bubble is about to pop downtown, we have all these many projects going before the collapse. He is going to that job site, and he's doing it apart from the regulable activity of transportation. Why? Because he's not doing that for hire. He's not being hired to carry anything from place A.
Man, like I say, they're strong, man.
And
so we just do.
And that's why he is an innocent.
That's what we do.
That's
here
why he's an innocent
on our
man
show in Houston, Texas,
being accused, I would say maliciously, And I would say in bad faith, being accused by DA Neil Pinkston. Neil Pinkston is operating his legal show apart from the law. Neil Pinkston also has been notified by me, your host, David Toulis, that what the law says. Again, it's called Transportation Administrative Notice, and you can read it for yourself. It is a highly interesting or ultimately boring review of Tennessee law. But what it shows is that the way the law is written, the whole history of our Tennessee regulation from 1915 and even before, the regulation, the apparatus of enforcement is against only one group, and that is people involved in carrying goods or people for hire. And that activity is called transportation. It is in commerce. It is for profit. And people who are not involved in transportation, that would be you. You're a guy working in an office. You're a man working in a factory. You're going to a job site. You're not involved in transportation. You are simply using the people's roads. They belong to the people. You are using them for your own purpose. And what we have today to consider is that right? And I would say that if you have to ask permission to do something, it is not a right. That I don't have to say that. That's simply something that can be surmised. If you have to pay to do it, if you have to get permission to do it, it's not a right. If you have to get permission to kill your baby by an abortion, you don't have a right to kill your baby, right? You don't have as they say, a constitutional right to abortion. If you have to get permission to hold a protest, you don't have a right to have a protest. All you've got is permission. If you have to ask permission to marry, then you don't have a right to marry. There is no right that inheres in you as a human being made in God's image to marry a woman of your choice who gives consent. And with her consent, you can marry. And if you meet the 5 tests of marriage, you have a marriage. You have a legally defensible marriage apart from state statute, right? Most people get married and they think that they can't marry apart from the license. So they go and get the license from the county clerk. Bill Knowles grants a license. And he can also grant a license to queers to marry, of course. But he can grant licenses and does mostly to people like you, my listener, a man who marries a woman, or to your son who's marrying his girlfriend, right, in marriage. He has a license to do that. And that son of yours and you agree you can't marry without permission. So, therefore, you don't have a right to marry, do you? 800-8949. 800-8949. If you have to ask permission, you don't have a right. And the law is clear. The law in Tennessee and many court cases from the beginning have made it clear that the authority of the state is upon transportation only. Even the first court case out of the driver's license statute, 1939, Sullins v. Butler, makes it clear. And the fact that his attorney, the defendant's attorney, didn't raise the issue properly, let the court begin its long slide into blurring that distinction between transportation and travel. And the Sullins court did that, and many courts have since then. And the high court will not hear the most important case in 80 years. The high court has refused in Tennessee to grant petition for writ of certiorari to hear the case by J. Hirsch, the fiddle man of Lawrenceburg. He had a tremendous fact base and an extraordinary appeal. I highly commend his work. In defending himself against criminal charges, he was convicted in 2015 December on 4 counts, 1 gun count and 3 travel counts. He was convicted of using the public road as a matter of right, convicted as a criminal, and treated most abusively by the judicial industrial complex. And his appeal to the Tennessee Supreme Court denied. 800-8949. That's 800-8949. Brought to you by yournews.com. David Toulis, brought to you by yournews.com. I argue that you should love your neighbor and buy local. And we should care about the weak. We should care about the innocent. And Rudy Soto Rodriguez is an innocent man. He has done nothing wrong. He is not a criminal. And yet he is being charged by either the sheriff's department, Jim Hammond, or Andy Burke. Andy Burke, are you calling this man who uses the road as a matter of right, are you calling him a criminal? Andy, if it's your people in the police department who arrested him and charged him, are you calling this innocent Hispanic man a criminal? He has done nothing wrong. He is exercising a right that you, Andy Burke, should be able to defend because you, Andy Burke, are an attorney and you know the difference between a right and a privilege. And a right cannot be taxed. Andy Burke, are you going to let this continue? I've given you notice about this, Andy Burke. And I expect that there need to be changes made. And I have made it simple. I have made it simple. And that is by requiring David Roddy's officers, all 500 military officers in his command, to ask a new question at every transportation stop. And there is a question, and I'll tell you what that question is in just a minute. This is David Toulis. We have a reform in view. It is simply putting a few more words in the mouths of our courageous and fine officers in Hamilton County Sheriff's Department and the Chattanooga Chief Police Department and these other municipal corporation police departments. David Toulis, Nooga Radio, and now some important messages.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.